This week, in the first segment, Matt Cauthorn and Sri Sundaralingam from Extra Hop will join us to discuss why traditional IDS is dead. Kimberly Sutherland from LexisNexis Risk Solutions will discuss the new cybercrime landscape. In the enterprise security news, Thycotic and Centrify join forces. Netrix acquires StrongPoint. SentinelOne plans for IPO. Complex plans to go public. And funding announcements from Exonius, Hyas, Armor Blocks, and Platform 9. Ativo Networks announces continuous assessment enhancements for AD. cPacket Networks announces cCloud, a network packet capture and analytics solution for Azure. Cauthorn speeds up the process of keeping customers safe in hybrid cloud environments. Elastic announces an alerting framework. Bridgecrew automates cloud security in VS Code. Going passwordless with YubiKey and Microsoft Azure AD. The free ImmuniWeb Community Edition. Greathorn versus Proofpoint. CyberArk's new identity security offerings, and more. Stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. JumpCloud offers a cloud directory platform that gives users a single identity for their email, apps, network, and work device. Whether Mac, Windows, or Linux, JumpCloud gives IT admins a single pane of glass to configure and secure those devices. With JumpCloud, remote onboarding and offboarding goes from hours to under 5 minutes and puts zero trust security within reach for organizations of any size. Looking for a directory that supports heterogeneous OSs, or you need just SSO, MDM, LDAP, or MFA? JumpCloud will make your job easier. Try it out for yourself at securityweekly.com/JumpCloud. Welcome, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly, episode number 218 from March 3rd, 2021. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, joined remotely by Adrian Sanabria. Adrian, welcome.
Hello, Paul. Hello, Tyler. Been
Tyler
looking forward
Shields,
to this.
also here with us. Tyler, welcome.
Hello, everyone. Great to see you again.
Yes, nice to be on this fresh, shiny new episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. If you missed Security Weekly Unlocked, you can now access all the content on demand, whether you registered before the live event or not. Go to securityweekly.com/unlocked. You can log in if you've already registered or create a new registration, consume all the content. Joining us today for our sponsored interview is Matt Cauthorn and Sri Sundaralingam from Extra Hop to talk about why traditional IDS is dead and how to fill some of those gaps. Matt, Sri, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here again.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Nice to have you both. You know, it's interesting. Matt took me back to my early days in IDS, which is kind of ironic. I don't want to go on about myself, but I got my start in the field largely in the IDS kind of realm with the SANS Institute. I was blessed to be taught by the likes of Stephen Northcutt and Judy Novak, which was just amazing. And when I was implementing, 20 plus years ago, when you were doing IDS, before other people declared it as dead, and we thought they were crazy. Turns out they were right. And I think Matt and Sri are right as well. There are lots of problems with capacity, performance, not being integrated with some of your other systems. It's essentially looking for just anomalies on the network and kind of this standalone thing. We had encryption to deal with if the data was encrypted. And we had lots of problems. I like to, kind of proud to say, I think folks such as Extra Hop have addressed a lot of those issues and shortcomings with traditional IDS. Matt, Sri, would you say that's a pretty good place to start? Is some of those challenges maybe 20 years ago we encountered?
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful place to start, and I think it's almost like there's not a whole heck of a lot more to say, really. But I'm kidding. So you're exactly right, though, Paul. Where if you think about just zooming out for a minute from to the practice itself, we're for years and years now, we've been capturing the same set of byte streams in multiple different places in the network. Let's start at the edge with an IDS, a perimeter-based IDS. Typically, IDS historically has been focused north-south, so we'll start there. Then on the inside of the environment, you have, say, continuous packet capture. And in between those sort of bookends, you have modern day NDR and maybe some sandboxing. And so now you're like looking at 3 or 4 different capture points of the same byte streams in many cases, or most. And we believe it makes very, very little sense to the extent that you can accommodate scale, decryption, dynamic environments in the cloud or hybrid environments, as well as the east-west corridor with north-south as well. So for performance reasons, as you noted earlier, the traditional IDS approach of this sort of packet level matching, the north-south volume, the north-south connection counts, the north-south concurrency requirements are a lot more, they're a lot less stringent than east-west, we'll say. In the server-to-server corridor, things get really, really tricky from a scale perspective. And so you need to design for that. But if done correctly, a solution should be able to address all of those problem cases and more.
And be an interface to the network team as well. You know, I remember negotiating with the network team. You could only support so many span ports 20 years ago. And that limitation still exists today, right? Yep. Depending on your network architecture. And they're like, well, we need to steal this one to do some troubleshooting, right? And you may take away from security because I'm hogging all the span ports because I want to run all the traffic through Snort at the time, right? And I like the ExtraHop platform. One reason is it's a shared platform oftentimes with multiple groups within the organization.
Yeah, network analytics is network analytics, and there should be multiple beneficiaries in the organization. Now, in many cases, security needs a sort of four-walled view of the world, which I can get. But in many cases, increasingly, that sort of hybrid, especially in the cloud, that sort of hybrid use case that you described, Paul, it's very, very prevalent. And, you know, you see server responses, you see errors, you see latency, you see all of these things. That should be in scope as well. Shri, do you have any comments?
Yeah, sorry, Shri, we keep cutting you off.
Yeah, no. I wanted to add to some of the comments Matt made earlier. One of the key issues with IDS we should talk about is, it's been a noisy alert canon, right? Just too much false positives, where mainly IDS alerts have been ignored in the past. And the other side of it is lack of efficacy, right? Because, it's taken a signature-based foundational approach to threat detection, right? Its inability to catch today, when you look at advanced threats like supply chain attacks to, APT-related activities and even ransomware, right? From a network perspective, it's unable to help in those areas. So to add to what you guys are saying, I think, finally it's time, to rethink standalone IDS strategy, just like the evolution AV went through, from AV to next-gen AV and EDR. I think it's about time to rethink, what's the purpose of standalone IDS system, and, what should be the requirements, right, for next-gen IDS to provide better efficacy, close some of the compliance gaps, Matt, and you talked about Paul in terms of cloud and encrypted traffic. And then as Matt mentioned, how do you improve, with next-gen IDS, the amount of footprint and coverage you can provide, right? Not just for north-south traffic, but for also east-west traffic.
Yeah, I think it plays into the larger role of security in the organization that not only has to just look at attacks that are coming in. And I think traditionally that's been the use case for IDS. I just want to see what attacks are coming at me. And we've progressed so far in so many different areas that we have to look at the attack as a whole. We have to look at what's going out, and not just a command and control, but what other types of data are going out. I think it was, ExtraHop, you had given a demo about ransomware detection. Like, did that file actually leave the network? Well, the best place to look is the network when you're looking for that, that type of stuff. So being able to then correlate this data and integrate it with some of your other tools and systems and processes, I think is super important, rather than, when I was going to work 20 years ago going, oh, got to go check my IDS, see if I have any alerts. And then it was a manual process to go, okay, what do I do from here?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the rhetorical question is, let's check and see if I have alerts, and I can answer for everyone on the globe. The answer is yes in IDS world, right? And so now the adjudication process is a big deal. How quickly can I come to a conclusion, up or down, as to the veracity of this result? And moreover, what are my investigative steps behind the alert, right? And so this is another area where Traditionally, network-centric approaches have sort of handed the investigative workflows off to other solutions like an endpoint or a SIM, and we believe philosophically that approaches that swivel chair integration, we call it. It need not happen, because if you treat the network as a data source for analytics, then you should be able to mine those analytics and accelerate investigative workflows, threat hunt, support your security controls, and much more.
Tyler, did you have a question, or?
Yeah. So quick question. So from a technical perspective, how does your product differentiate from the traditional stack then, right? Is it the sensor-based model that makes it uniquely different, or can you give us just 10 seconds on the technical differentiation?
Yeah, huge technical differentiation. So, and I'll go kind of deep here for a minute. We deploy like a traditional IDS or sniffer or continuous packet capture appliance would. In other words, we sit out of band and consume the packets, but we invoke full stream reassembly, and we act stateful even though we're out of band. And when we process all of these connections, millions concurrently, we have a proprietary microkernel, and so our scalability is really, really powerful, up to 100 gigs per second with TLS 1.3 decryption, passive, not being a bump in the wire. It's very unique. And the differentiation is our scale, our protocol depth, breadth, fluency, and our rules engine. When you want to talk about writing a custom rule to match some IOC that matters to you, we have an API into the network itself from layer 2 through 7, as opposed to just the contents of a packet. It's a very, very different approach, and it's much more sort of modern in its treatment.
If I can add one point
too. Oh, sorry,
if I could add one, if I can add, Taylor, one point to what Matt said. We completely rethought what's the foundational approach, right, to network-based threat detection and response, and we built the architecture on AI ML technology, right? It's not built on signature-based foundation as traditional IDS systems have operated in the past. So it's the foundation itself is based on AI ML technologies with behavioral detection, with all the capabilities Matt talked about in terms of how it gets deployed and how it operates in the network.
Gotcha. And can you help us understand how you bridge the gap between the the physical device model you're describing and how that integrates and works with cloud workloads? Yeah.
We don't really discriminate where we run from. It could be Azure, GCP, AWS, and all can at the same time if you're multi-cloud, or some combination of that and terrestrial data center. As long as we're able to consume raw byte streams, raw packets that are mirrored to us, we can accommodate Docker environments evenly. We don't care, and we can federate all of those views across environments, which is super useful to customers.
What I also find interesting as you describe the technology is that while we want a lot of those integrations and to be able to detect these attacks that are crossing multiple different systems and technologies and techniques, we still have to deal with the good old-fashioned TCP/IP stack vulnerabilities. Because just when you think like we must have found all the bugs in TCP/IP stacks, that is totally not true, and we've seen many shining examples that you still need this visibility into the network for a lot of reasons. But one is, 30 plus years later, there's still flaws in the implementation of TCP/IP.
Yeah, I mean, last year alone was a big year for stack flaws. I mean, Ripple in and of itself was a monster disclosure. So yep. Absolutely right. And I don't foresee it going away just because of the ubiquity and it seems like there's this sort of reluctance in some cases or many cases to address it, especially when you're dealing with IoT and other devices, this sort of explosion of connected devices. So it'll be around.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you're right, Matt, that IoT has certainly been the source of a lot of these vulnerabilities. And there's Forescout that does some research and has published some open research on that. And, I think it's pretty obvious that you can't run a full TCP/IP stack because you're limited on hardware and capacity. So you write your own, or you go buy a common one that someone's already kind of retrofitted for that device. That seems to be the source of where they're coming from today. And I still get excited when I see fragmentation reassembly attacks because I'm like, yep. Oh, yes, we still see these. I'm like, oh wait, it's bad, but it's exciting for me as a nerd to see that I still get to apply that knowledge that I spent so much time early on.
It's funny you say that, Paul. The fragmentation is a sort of tried and true and established approach to bypass traditional IDS, IPS, and in certain cases firewalls even.
Mm-hmm.
And because we're stateful and we do stream reassembly, we actually reassemble the byte stream itself and investigate it all. So we're really, really robust for evasion techniques like that. It's an interesting approach, and it's a nice artifact of the way we do our stream reassembly.
That's awesome. Adrian, do you have a question?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
Tyler, he nabbed most of my questions already.
Gotcha.
Well, I like to pick Arian's brain because I used to work with him when he was at 451 Research when we went through the AV to next-gen AV and EDR evolution, Adrian. And it just feels like, I think it's time, right, to rethink standalone IDS strategy and how standalone IDS, works and operates. So I don't know if you have some perspectives from that evolution. We went from AV to next-gen AV.
Yeah, sure.
EDR.
I mean, that's generally kind of my shtick is noodling on that big picture kind of view, and that's something I think we've seen as I used to joke, that everything's continuous next gen because, and also it's kind of terrible to take a security company public because it's the very nature of security that we kind of have to tear down and reinvent it on a regular basis because the underpinnings are constantly changing. And obviously with cloud, and as we understand attacks better, and as attacks change, and attack surface changes and techniques change, oftentimes we find old approaches, and maybe it's not that they don't work; they're just not effective or efficient enough. Which I think is the case with traditional IDS. It's not that it doesn't work; it's that the labor to value ratio between the two, the payoff isn't good enough, or isn't where it could be.
It's largely an economics problem. I completely agree with you there, and not in economics in the strict sense. It's a sort of just overall utility to input ratio. I would completely agree with that. Yeah. It's like time to expect more from analytics solutions. Mm-hmm. And as an analytics solution, you can and should be able to do rules-based processing and rules-based detections. And so it really does feel like a natural evolution where IDS in its totality really is really a simple use case for modern network-based detection and response.
Yeah, and one of the things we're starting are these product reviews, and one of the metrics that we look at is the what I call the labor to value ratio, where we can now hopefully measure not only whether or not vendor A and vendor B can detect the attack, can find the problem or solve a problem, but how much effort does it take to get to that point? Versus, between vendor A and vendor B. And that becomes a focal point, for purchasing a technical solution is they can both get us there, but, now it's like miles per gallon on a car. We're looking at the efficiency, do I have to hire a few extra people in my SOC for product A where I don't with product B? Maybe the products cost the same, but the overhead can be quite different.
Yeah, I would add to that, Adrian, and make the case it's not just buying new solutions and maybe even looking at consolidating existing solutions you have, mm-hmm. right? So, like in our scenario with ExtraHop, we can help organizations consolidate, move away from traditional IDS systems as well as traditional network forensic systems, right? Because we're able to provide from that, visibility to, detection to full workflow that Matt described, right? In terms of investigating, whether it's detected incidents or possible scenarios you're investigating, even without a detection. We can take you all the way, right? From that to mm-hmm. packet level, to, if you need to get to packet level, to get to additional forensics data. So I would argue, not just purchasing new solutions, but also looking at what you have and maybe rethinking your approach.
Absolutely.
Well, also
kind of
along those lines, another thing Adrian and I are discovering more intimately now is when we try and put solutions in a particular category or set of categories, you run up to almost in every single category. I think we've got 80 or so, between 50 and 80 categories, and you can look at one larger vendor or even smaller vendors that are like, look, I can check the boxes in the triad or quadrants of network, logs, and endpoint and threat intelligence. But how well do they do that? What advice does everyone collectively have if you're going down this path? Do I go with one solution that tells me I can check these boxes, or do I choose solutions in each of those areas that best fit my needs and then tie them all together? And there's a trade-off.
Yeah, the point versus platform approach. Yeah. And I think that's always going to be a challenge, and it's something you have to constantly go back and ask yourself and reevaluate where the market's at and where some of these products are at. And that's what we're hoping to do with some of these product reviews, is take some of the work out of that for right. buyers and answer some of those questions up front. But yeah, it did lead me to the question, though, of looking at some of the marketing on your website. A lot of it suggests that you're primarily focused on north-south. But we do often see IDS, traditional IDSs and newer ones that are more in a east-west position. Especially as we get further and further into zero trust architecture, and people still trying to tackle segmentation in their networks.
Yeah. So actually, our emphasis is quite heavily on the east-west corridor, as a matter of fact, as opposed to north-south. And there's a reason for that. One is our scalability and our protocol parsing capabilities favor it. But two, when you deploy next to the target assets, the server assets, you get north-south flows into the server corridor effectively for free, just as an artifact of your deployment. And it's a really, really natural place to get this comprehensive view. And then you can instrument, a couple of the sort of DMZ VLANs, and bam, you've got a full coverage of the north-south and east-west corridor. So, if we definitely gravitate towards east-west. North-south is another valuable use case to us, especially for filtration. I think Paul sort of led with that. It's not just who's knocking at the front door. The NGFWs have done a really good job at sort of squelching that, but more importantly, perhaps, who's leaving, what's the nature of that data, where is it going, where did it come from, and what campaign is that, egress activity attached to in the east-west corridor.
Right.
I guess I want to ask Matt and Sri a specific question, because I'm sure you hear this from potential customers that go, I've got this platform and it does network stuff. It gives me net flow, and I think that's good enough. Is it good enough?
Yeah, good question, Paul. Because, look, there's nothing wrong with a multi-product solution vendor providing their solution, right? As long as, they're providing best-of-breed capabilities, whether it's endpoint, whether it's cloud, right? And, our thinking on this is, look, we have been working with a lot of vendors in the security industry, right, who make it an open approach, right, with their solutions, whatever you want to call it, extended detection and response. XDR seems to be a buzz, of all a buzz lately, right? So as long as you're taking an open approach, right, to provide your solution with open and extensible APIs. We've done integrations with a lot of vendors, right, where we can, provide our capabilities to be integrated in a plug-and-play approach with the best-of-breed endpoint capability, let's say next-gen AV with EDR, with cloud capability, cloud security capabilities being provided by a particular vendor, perhaps. So like CrowdStrike, for an example, is what I can provide to you, a lot of the work we've done recently. And there's several other integrations we've done as well. So that's the case we would put in front of organizations, is don't settle for good enough security, right? Just because a vendor promises they're going to, simplify and reduce complexity, but then do you, live with, blind spots and gaps, with good enough security in specific areas? Versus if you keep an open approach to your strategy, you can deploy best of breed vendors like us and the integrations we provide, and have it both ways.
And Paul, to go back to your the NetFlow question for a minute. Look, NetFlow is a very valid data source for especially like distributed environments or branch offices, manufacturing floors where you don't have the instrument or the plumbing available to do mirroring, and it's not really worth it to send an appliance out there in a dedicated capacity. And so it's a very, very valid use case, but it's not at all at parity to transaction level analysis. Behaviors manifest in the transactions at layer 7, typically, usually layer 4 through 7. And that's where you find the richest analytics to extract features from and invoke machine learning and sophisticated rules against. And so the transaction awareness really, really matters in the modern era of threat, especially, I mean, you just need to look at last year alone, just that 1 year to validate a more sort of leveled up approach to the data sources.
And I also think a tool is only as useful as the interface makes it available, right? And at Extra Hop, I think your interface, you folks have done just a fantastic job with making that accessible. I don't want to say easy to use is not necessarily the right term. How would you describe like the features and planning that went behind what goes in the interface?
That's a super good question. And I've been here for a long time now. Coming up on 10 years. And I can tell you that we've always been really good at accommodating scale. And one of the last mile issues we've had as a company, and I'm not a product representative formally, I'm kind of a formal ops guy that came over here because I liked what I saw, frankly. And so the actual last mile problem is if you're ingesting, hundreds and hundreds of terabytes, or even on the high end, petabytes of raw ingested packet data per day, how do you present that in a low friction way? That's how I would classify it, Paul, is like you want to be able to interact with your analytics in a low friction, sort of high velocity way. And we've made some serious investments in our user experience. And we've got a team of like absolute stars, in my opinion, back at corporate to help design and streamline the user interface and the user experience, and the sort of all the way through to the investigative workflows, the packet interface, the record interface, and the summary views that they roll up. Reports are very, very sexy. Frankly, they just look fantastic, and they're very data dense but low friction is the way I would classify it.
Yeah, I would add customer validation points to what Matt was saying, because Paul, we've had scenarios where organizations struggle with, sort of overall human capacity, right? Number of personnel they have in their security team. So we've had IT ops team use of a product to, learn security and to come better at in terms of helping the security team, and actually help career transitions as well for folks to go from IT ops into the security team. So it really shows when we look at our customers in terms of how they have benefited to leverage our product to train their personnel, right, and increase their skill depth as well.
Yeah, that's a really compelling statement, Sri, and it's interesting. As I worked with network engineers at the university 20 years ago, many of them made the transition into security, and to have a tool that allows them to learn and make that transition more easily is exactly what we need today.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, learning everything from the protocols to the network behavior, to understanding threat models, and then being able to become more and more capable day-to-day dealing with responding to different type of issues in the environment. Absolutely.
It doesn't let them off the hook to read TCP/IP Illustrated Volume 1 by Richard Stevens cover to cover.
I agree.
Still a great book, though.
Right?
It's a great book, man.
Everyone involved with networks and security should absolutely read that book, right?
I think it levels you up. If you understand that book, you go into it at this level and you leave it at another level completely. Yeah. You think about things differently.
Awesome. Well, folks want to learn more, you can visit securityweekly.com/extra hop. Make sure you go check it out. As I said, the interface is really beautiful and a welcome addition to the tool sets that we have with nice user interfaces. So, which actually are not very many, unfortunately. So, Matt and Sri, thank you so much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly.
Thank you. Good to see you all.
Thank you, guys.
With that, we'll take a short break. Stick around. We're going to be talking with Kimberly Sutherland coming up next.